Welcome to First Class Fantasy. I'm Theo Gremminger, joined as always by Billy Muzio. Billy, we're rocking and rolling for our third show back since your little hiatus. And look at this, Billy. You're breaking out a brand new haircut. You're already changing it up. This is about as clean cut Billy Muzio as we have seen. The beard, if you're listening on the podcast, Billy's got like it's really nice. It's like short on the sides.
It's a two on the sides, Theo.
It's a two on the sides. So it's not like I'm like a skin fade on the side guy at the bottom. But so if you're trying to visualize this, Billy's got like a nice fade, really, really proper on top. And the beard, Billy, the beard is completely cleaned up. So I love it. What prompted this? This is just a summertime look?
Yeah, summertime's getting warmer. I got some meetings coming up next month. I wanted to look presentable for. And then ultimately, honestly, it's getting out of the shower with long hair and your hair's wet for like an hour and 20 minutes. It's kind of annoying, and it's all this management of like shampoo and conditioner and combing it. Like, shout out to any of our women listeners. Like, I have a whole new respect for women and like taking care of your hair. It is a monumental task. And now I know why my wife gets ready and how long it takes. I'm never going to hassle her again.
Well, there you go, Billy.
Maybe
and again, looking clean, big hat tip to you. I'm a haircut all the time guy. I agree with you. It's a nice life hack. You don't have to worry about it. You go to the barber, keep it nice and clean, and it makes your summertime a lot easier. But one thing, our women listeners and our men listeners are excited about is today we're talking about stacking. And I think stacking is sort of like an operative word where you're seeing a lot of like continually getting deeper and deeper in the weeds. At first we had, player stacking, player correlation. Then we looked into the stacking without the quarterback becoming a big popular thing to do. And now, game week stacking is something where if you're not game week stacking, like when the schedule release comes out, it's like a best ball holiday where people are continually looking for those week 17 games to attack. But before we even dive into stacking, let's talk a little bit about, relevant news. And one thing that was interesting this week is Nico Collins gets a huge paycheck. Gets a 3-year contract, big money with Houston. What does this say to you about, their plans for Nico? I think this was a guy where there was a little bit of question marks with some, whether that his production could go down this year, whether this was somewhat of a one-year wonder type, not necessarily with me and you, but that was out there in the community with some. What does this contract say to you about their plan with Nico, and how should we be treating him?
I think they're also looking, I think they're smart. They're looking into the future and trying to lock them up with current prices. And every year we look at contracts, we say, oh man, somebody overspent on quarterback or somebody overspent in this regard. And then we look back in 2 or 3 years and we realize that was actually a decent deal because just like inflation, the cost of players go up too. And as the budget of teams and the overall, allocation of funds move up, then we are, seeing these contracts rise as well. So I think this also just speaks to the level of trust that they had with him and what he was able to perform last year. I think that they want to make their young franchise quarterback happy and continue to give him weapons. And we saw the chemistry that Nico Collins and they had last year, and they went out and got him another weapon with Diggs, and they have a lot of up and coming, young players as well. They kind of went all in and got Mixon as well in the offseason. So, I mean, Houston Texans, pretty quick turnaround and our exciting team again. And so I think that it speaks more about the franchise and about keeping players together and about, taking care of their own. And so I'm glad to see it.
Yeah. And we have the weapons that we know about when it comes to CJ Stroud, where Nico Collins, was able to be so productive in the NFL playoffs. They go out and add Stephon Diggs. He gets Tank Dell back. They even bring back Noah Brown. Dalton Schultz is brought back, and they add Joe Mixon. I think you nailed it. I think it's a real testament to Houston building a foundation and just surrounding Stroud with multiple players who can win on any given week. You can make an argument that Collins is the best bet here. Now that he has the contract insulation, we already saw Tank Dell sort of miss time with an injury. He's a little bit more slight. Nico Collins, with those kind of smash games, Billy, he could be a guy that is like an ascending alpha on the outside who can win in many different ways. And he could be the touchdown guy in this offense. So if this offense takes a big step forward, I think it could be Nico. And Nico's a guy where we had to adjust our dynasty ranks on him this week at Player Profile. It'll be interesting to see where he ends up in our rankings when we get down to like August in redraft. Your gut feel, where are you comfortable taking Nico at this point?
So that's what I was about to say. I think he's almost a little priced out currently, just because there's a lot of variables this year. I mean, the addition of Diggs, who's we've seen him get pretty, emotional and loud when he's not being targeted in previous offenses. And so if we can kind of count on that consistency, if he's not getting the ball, then he's going to be, throwing temper tantrums, and they're more than likely going to start giving him the ball. And then on top of it, you still have Tank Dell. Like we just talked about Nico. They still have Noah Brown, who excelled last year, and Mixon is a pass catching back. Schultz is not like he's a scrub, and so I think honestly, as much as I like Nico, this is coming from a guy who was like 50% Nico last year because he was so cheap. I think that at this price, I will own shares because I don't want to get beat by him because I like him. But I'm a little hesitant to pull the trigger just because of the price and knowing that I can wait around and get Stephon Diggs, or I can wait 2 rounds to get Tank Dell, or I can get other pieces of the offense at a discount rate if I'm looking for correlation. So I like Nico, but I'm a little hesitant on the price right now.
I think you could see. I think I'll agree with you on that. Like the steam is really, really high. He's at wide receiver 15 overall. And all it's going to take is a little bit of splash plays this summer for him to sort of pass by the Deebo Samuel level. Let's give you a quick OTC. Nico is at wide receiver 15. Do you prefer Nico or Mike Evans at wide receiver 16?
I'd probably go with Mike Evans, honestly. And it depends on what I'm building too, right? Like we talk about stacks, and we're going to get to that in a minute. We talk about correlation. I would much rather have the Houston schedule. So I'd probably, as much as I like Evans and being the wide receiver 1 in a clear cut 1-2 role in his offense, I would still take pieces I tell you that every time I answer this way, Theo, it depends upon what I'm building and how I'm doing it. It's not a cookie cut answer. If I was doing a single bullet, I'd probably take Nico just because of the playoff schedule. But if I'm, depending upon how I'm building a team or what I'm looking at, I might go Evans another build too.
And I think that's
a good line.
I think that's fine. I think that's also we're a nuanced and we're not a cookie cutter podcast. We're talking about trying to help you win in fantasy, not just, flip a coin here and guess. Mike Evans versus Nico, it's two guys that could score a ton of touchdowns if you want to keep it super simple. One guy's the clear-cut wide receiver 1 in his offense. Yeah. The other guy has a better quarterback, but more target competition, and they're both about the same price. So it's a kind of pick your poison. Both can also be fine players. Two spots down from Nico Collins is Jalen Waddle. And you talked about the contract that Houston gave Nico was sort of getting ahead of the market, and they actually saved some money when you compare it to Jalen Waddle. Now, certainly Jalen Waddle's a little higher pedigree guy, 3 straight years of being 1,000-yard receiver, not just one big season. But Jalen Waddle, this is a guy who could be a real positive touchdown regression guy this year, Billy. Only 4 touchdown receptions last year. And that Miami offense, I think one thing that's not really talked about is year 3 for Mike McDaniel. The comfort level for Mike McDaniel, like year 1 was sort of like a revelation. We were like, this guy's a genius, literally a genius. Then last year, it even took it up another notch where you have guys like Mostert, Devon Achane really, really hitting. This year, it's like comfort level crazy. This could be 30 points per game. Last year, they were 27.9 points per game, and they get Jalen Waddle locked down for the next 3 years. Your thoughts on Waddle, who I find myself drafting quite a lot on Underdog, and I imagine I'll have a good amount of him in redraft as well.
Yeah, I like Waddle as well. I mean, we've seen him be successful now all 3 years in his short career right now. He's had 1,000 yards or more, and in all 3 years, rookie even came out of the gate with 1,015 yards and 6 touchdowns. In 2022, he gets 8 touchdowns, and last year on 14 games, he gets 1,000 yards again. And he was banged up for a lot of the year, honestly. And I thought he maybe should have missed more time. He had that concussion in week 2. He tweaked his back mid-season. I think it was like week 8 or 9. He had that knee tweak as well, and then he ended up getting that chest hit, and then he had that high ankle sprain late down the stretch. And so the fact that he was able to play through most of that throughout the season just is a testament to him as a player. A lot of players nowadays, it's like baseball, hangnail, and they're out for 4 games. And so, you see that in the NFL now as well. And so I think that him and the offense that we're at, explosive, Tyreek Hill's drawing a lot of attention. They got speed in every position, the running back position, they got speed at the receiver position, speed everywhere. And so it's hard to defend this team, and it's going to just open up lanes for everybody. So I like Waddle. I think the contract's smart, and I think it was smarter than blocking down.
Yeah, and I have a 3 spot tonight in our hardway draft that we do with a number of these FFPC drafters. Always a great way to start off the summer, and it's like Waddle's kind of in consideration for me at the beginning of the 3rd round right there, Billy. I think it gives you a little bit of firepower when you take him with that early 3rd round pick. So who knows, Billy? Who knows which way I'm going to go with that one? But want to pick your brain on San Francisco. And one sort of under the radar thing this week was Nico Collins and Jalen Waddle were not the only 2 wide receivers to sign. We saw Juan Jennings get an extension with the 49ers. And sort of like hey man, we have this Brandon Ayuk not at OTAs kind of hanging over our heads. But San Francisco quietly went out and extended Jennings, who's had his moments in San Francisco. Does this timing of this contract mean anything to you in terms of what they want to do with Debo and Ayuk, or it's just let's get Juwan Jennings, settled in. This is our wide receiver 4. He's comfortable with the system, and we're happy with him.
Yeah, I think it's more about that. It's the devil you know versus the devil you don't, right? And it gives them a little bit of flexibility too. If Ricky Pearsall has maybe a slow development, or maybe they decide to move on from Debo or from Brandon Ayuk, there's a lot of variables still within this 49ers offense, and I think this gives them some flexibility. And we saw, Jennings kind of be that spark towards the end of the season last year and in the playoffs, and we've seen him be successful in the role when people have missed time. And so I think it's a good signing, and I think it gives them a lot of flexibility and being able to use him in creative packages.
Jennings is an interesting one if you're trying to build a San Francisco stack. We're going to talk about San Francisco as a stack option a little later in the show, but one player who there was other news came out about it with San Francisco this week was George Kittle. George Kittle's a guy where we talked about him this afternoon when we were planning for this episode. Billy, he's like the cheapest he's been on Underdog and certainly in FFPC. Maybe since his rookie year. It's actually his 2nd year when he broke out. Right now he's going off the board as tight end 7, but he's going 66 overall on Underdog, and then in FFPC certainly fell a little bit. Last year his production was excellent. He had 1,000 receiving yards. He had six touchdowns. The year before, 11 touchdowns. It's a guy where he always seems to be getting injured, and now we find out that he actually played with a core injury since week 10 last year. So like there was like under the radar injuries he was playing through. Does this make you think 2 things? Is it, hey, maybe Kittle's healthy this year and he's going to be a steal at ADP? Or is it, oh man, it's another injury on George Kittle's ledger, and this is just catching up with an older player, and he's a void for me this year? What way are you feeling about Kittle?
I think you can be a little bit of both, because yes, he's injury prone because he plays at 100% speed in every play, and he's a great blocker as well as a receiver. So he's got the risk of injury, on multiple levels. But at the same time, we have to look at what he's been able to do, and we also have to look at contingent upside as well. So we talked about the variables. What happens if the Niners move on from Ayuk, or he holds out and he misses games? What happens if they decide to sign Ayuk and move Debo? Now you have a consolidated target tree, because right now there's only 25 vacated targets in this offense, but you remove one of these playmakers like Debo or Ayuk, and now they're relying on like Ricky Pearsall and Juan Jennings, and now Kittle's a much more important piece inside of this passing game. And I'd say 1,000 yards is easily within reach at that point, and probably closer to double-digit touchdowns again. So I would say that he's a value right now at current ADP. I mean, he finished as the tight end 6. The last time he finished as tight end 6 or lower was his rookie year in 2017. Prior to that, he's been inside the top 4 in the position since 2018. So I think it's a big value, and with the contingent upside, I think I've been drafting him quite a bit.
Yeah, and I like, not to get too stacky before we get into it, I've liked going with Kittle on like a CMC build where I'm able to kind of avoid the wide receivers altogether, but I have 2 potential big-time touchdown upside guys in the same offense. And where he's going, Billy, sort of like in the past, it was if I'm going to take George Kittle when he's going off the board as like tight end 3, then that sort of changes my view where I'm not really double tapping the tight end spot for a while. But now, like where Kittle goes at tight end 7, I can go with like a Kittle, Brock Bowers, Kittle, David Njoku, Kittle, Evan Engram type build, and it's not crushing my build. I'm able to get like 2 potential high-end tight ends in best ball, and the price is sort of right for me. So, you always have to worry about him missing time, but we don't take zeros when he's not there, especially in redraft and in best ball. So Kittle, I think appropriately priced, worth the risk despite his age, despite him playing like a Viking warrior, trying to chip everyone and mix it up on every single play blocking wise. But Billy, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we're diving into stacking. We're going to talk stacking strategy. We're going to talk about some correlation plays. We're going to talk about under the radar stacks, and we're each going to reveal our top 5 stacks for 2024. We will be right back.
This episode is made possible by Underdog Fantasy, and Underdog Fantasy is the leader in best ball. When you go to join an Underdog Fantasy best ball draft, it fills very quickly. Especially now, it's Best Ball Mania season, baby! Best Ball Mania 5! I can't believe they're at Best Ball Mania 5 already. $15 million in prizes. They're giving out $15 million with $1.5 million to first. Playing in best ball leagues makes you better. It helps train you on player value and strategy. And Underdog offers a lot more than just best ball contests. They offer pick'ems. My new favorite, the golf pick'ems. But they have the NBA pick'ems, baseball pick'ems going on throughout the offseason. Hit the pick'ems, back to best ball, hit the pick'ems. So use promo code Underworld. Promo code Underworld gets you a 50% deposit bonus up to $250. So they've increased the maximum deposit bonus. It was $100. Now it's up to $125. When you get the Underdog app, use promo code Underworld and go draft your ass off.
So Billy, we're almost in June. This is draft time. Again, I talked about tonight. I'm in a 350 FFPC league. This is the Fantasy Pros Championship, so it's a $1 million prize to first. You basically you got to kind of get out of your draft in order to qualify. There's a couple ways to do it for the sprint, but there's several contests like this where you talk about in FFPC the Fantasy Pros, FFPC the main event, NFFC the prime time, the RotoWire Online Championship. And then certainly the most popular tournament out there right now is Underdog with Best Ball Mania, and then also all the iterations that they have, such as the Puppy and all the other Pomeranian, you name it. They got so many tournaments going on. But generally, I feel like stacking was something where it was a little more like niche years back, where something like, high stakes people were doing it, certain best ball, best ball strategists were doing it. It wasn't accepted across. Now you go to any single league, whether it's a home league, whether it's, some little small league, everybody's talking stacking. It's become such a common term, common vernacular for us as fantasy players. What's your general feeling about that? Like the general dive into stacking?
I think it's needed at times, but I think it's a bit overrated now. So many people are talking about stacking and correlation, and I think there's a difference here. Correlation is different from stacking, and stacking is different from correlation, and we need to know that, because people are going outside of tiers in order to complete a stack. When I say outside of tiers, right, we talked about Nico Collins and Mike Evans. That to me is the same tier, right? But if you were stacking and you had a team, and let's just say that you took Tyreek in round 1, and then say he fell to spot 5, and then the middle of the second round you decide to take Jalen Waddle, and you passed on somebody like Olave, or you passed on somebody like Brandon Ayuk. To me, that's in a maybe slightly higher tier, not much. Maybe that's a bad example, but there's times where I've seen people reach 2 rounds, a round and a half, just to complete a stack. And there's, 3, 4, 5 wide receivers on the board who have had consistent production for years and years and years on end. Like good examples like Deontay Johnson right now, where I see people pushing up, a wide receiver 3 on their own team and a rookie at that above Deontay Johnson. And I think where I'm going with this is that it's correlation is needed. And when I say correlation, like week 17 correlation, week 15 correlation, week 16 correlation, having, game stacks is good, but I don't think you need to go out of your way to get 3 or 4 pieces on one team to stack a best ball team. And like, I want 4 Houston Texans, right? And so there's a fine line between overstacking and there's a fine line between not having enough correlation. So I think it's important to have a bit of both, but don't go out of your way and don't overstack and lose value on the board.
Yeah, so some of the older drafters, like a lot of our high stakes listeners, people used to call it combinations. So if you talk to like Chris Vaccaro and Billy Wazowski and guys like Dave Hubbard, you know, they're going to talk about like people would always try to have that combo. Billy's talking about correlation versus stacking. I think like we're not language police, but it's like if you want to get really technical on this one, a correlation can be several things. It's trying to have the most general way to think of correlation for me is it's a quarterback and a receiver. I'm building a correlation play between a quarterback and, you know, either a tight end, a wide receiver, or a pass catching running back. In the past, it could have been a Tom Brady, James White correlation play. Stacking is when I go further than 2. Stacking to me is when it's something larger than that. A stack could be a quarterback with 2 receivers, 3 receivers, and then like you talked about, multiple guys in a big game stack. Correlation in Billy's talking about with the game 7 week 17 could simply be me having an Atlanta Falcon and saying I also want a high-end Washington Commander and attack that game. I think correlation, like what you're talking about, correlation being necessary, like I agree with you. I think that correlation also kind of prevents me from ruining my build by trying to accomplish something. Whereas stacking, I can completely rip up my ticket if I go too invested into something. Like, for example, I think it's we can kind of segue this to you, but it's sort of like there's not really a magic number with this. I think when certain situations present themselves and there's a ton of value, I don't mind having a little extra. But when I have to use too much early capital to accomplish like some sort of a mega stack, like Houston right now, if I am reaching to get Nico Collins, reaching to get Stephon Diggs, reaching to get CJ Stroud, reaching to get Dalton Schultz, then I've really put my eggs in one basket. And then when I further that up with potentially reaching for a Raven to make sure that I have the week 17 action, I've not only ruined my build a little bit by reaching ahead of ADP, but I've also sort of pushed all my eggs in one basket. Are you sort of on the same page with that, Billy?
Yeah, I've been trying for like the last 3 days to build this Houston correlation build. And it's when I say Houston correlation, I'm talking about the weeks 15, 16, and 17, because to me, it's one of the sexiest schedules. You have Houston at Miami week 15, Houston at Kansas City week 16, and then Houston at Baltimore week 17. These are we're talking about probably the leading high score of the week in all 3 playoff contests. But if you try to build this thing on Underdog, you have to reach. Like, first of all, you have to be in the perfect spot. Like, you have to be at like pick 3 in order to get Tyreek Hill and then come back around and get Waddle or Nico, and then come around and get Diggs or be able to get A-Chain. And so then you come back around and you got to hope like Lamar falls to you. And then so it's a bunch of mini stacks is what it is, but you get a 3-week correlation. And every time I try to do this thing, like, destroy it at the same time. And I've got pieces of it, but I haven't been able to build it exactly how I've been trying to. And it's frustrating. But back to your point, it's like, here I am with doing like 5 drafts, trying to build this fucking thing. And I get to like round 5 or 6 and I get pissed off because I haven't been able to fucking do it. And then now my build looks like crap. And I have to start, diverting to like the second or third options on these offenses. And now the team's not nearly as deadly as I want it to be. So it's kind of an all-in move, and it's a donation unless you can actually get it. And if you can, great. It's going to be awesome. But then what happens if you lose? You have so much vested now in 3 or 4 offenses. What happens if 1 or 2 of those pieces get hurt? And I mean, that ticket's gone. So I think it's needed because you're looking at a bunch of high performing offenses, and if you can get pieces of it, but to your point, you don't need to go all in.
And Billy, how about we saw like yesterday, this is sort of going around social media. I know we both retweeted it because it was so shocking, but there was somebody trying to build that Houston Texans stack and somebody took CJ Stroud as their quarterback too. So I think the person had like Nico Collins and Stephon Diggs already like loaded in. And they were 1 pick away from getting CJ Stroud sort of at ADP. and the person in front of him had already taken Josh Allen, and the person in front of him takes CJ Stroud as their QB2, one pick ahead. And instead of just like, being like, oh man, I already have a little bit of correlation there with, the two receivers for Houston, I'm going to just make the proper pick. This person decides to basically ruin the draft, where they took two players that were like probably not even getting drafted at all, like the very bottom. To put it in perspective, like
Tanner Hudson.
Yeah, Tanner Hudson, and I forgot the wide receiver, but took two players who don't get drafted at all. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to get the entire contest canceled. Where Underdog, if there's something
the draft
fishy,
room, not the contest.
The draft room canceled. Where Underdog sees shenanigans, they cancel it up. But I mean, was that like the most childish, most ridiculous thing you've ever seen in a best ball draft?
Yeah, if I'm Underdog, I'm pretty much telling that guy kick rocks. Like, you can't create that culture, right? There's a fine line between gaming integrity, though. Like, if someone was in the room and taking draft picks way ahead of ADP like that, just because they're trying to help somebody else in the draft room, that's one thing. But if you can see that he started throwing a temper tantrum because he lost his stack, which is pretty obvious by that build, then I'd say, excuse my French, but fuck that guy. Like, that guy deserves to get banned, and they should make him, eat that team. And so I think that, yes, it definitely threw off ADP through the tournament, and we would hope that a winner doesn't emerge from that draft because of that. But I would definitely think that I think it would cause more harm than it would fix if they were to refund everybody their entries for that tournament and condone that type of behavior.
Yeah, what a joke that was. Definitely check it out. It was funny, but it was also like, oh my God, this guy's a lunatic, and also a badged guy on Underdog. That's what made it so like out there, was this was a guy that had earned a badge. So this guy's drafting all the time, or he's won several contests. Only two ways to get those things. Let's talk about that though, because this person had a Nico Collins, Stephon Diggs build. And I think this is also an underrated part of stacking and correlation, where you basically eschew having to take the quarterback, and instead you double tap at the receiver position, or simply double tap with like a tight end receiver, potentially even a running back and a receiver. But I'm basically double tapping from a particular team, betting on these two players having some sort of a correlation where potentially they both hit, or maybe it's something overlapping where I'm going to get 2 out of 3 weeks with them hitting, and that third week it's one of them spike weeking.
Yeah, I think something that I like to do here, it's on the same topic, and this speaks to exactly what I was talking about earlier. I was trying to get that build done, that's Houston 3-way stack, right? 15, 16, 17. And people don't want you to get it. So they start blocking you. They start drafting people ahead of you. If you can pivot to another game that has correlation with another team that you just built. So like, let's go ahead and take a look at, the Kansas City schedule now. Okay. Well, I just got sniped, right? So I can't get my Houston build. I can't get my Baltimore build. Well, they're playing Pittsburgh week 17, and Pittsburgh's got some cheap pieces. So maybe I was able to get, maybe someone took CJ Stroud from me, and I was able to take Patrick Mahomes, and I had Marquise Brown. Okay, well, now I'm going to pivot, right? So we talk about being fluid in draft rooms and being able to have, the ability to shift, on the spot. And I see people already attacking everything I'm trying to go for, or they're picking players well ahead of ADP because they don't want me to stack. And so, okay, I'm going to go for pieces people don't want. I'm going to wait now on quarterback, and I'm going to take, Russell Wilson as my quarterback 3 or 2. And I'm going to, start stacking Pat Freiermuth, or I'm going to take, Wilson, or I'm going to take, other pieces in this offense, so I can have correlation now with another team. And so I think this was why I preach correlation for stacking, because stacking can be overdone, but correlation, you can have as much correlation as you want. You can stack weeks 15 and 17, because if you win week 15, you're getting on to week 17. And if you make it to week 17, you're going to be golden. So there's so many different ways that you can build a team. And like everyone says, there's more than one way to skin a cat. Well, there's more than one way to draft a roster. And the more creative that you can get and have as much correlation as you can, it's going to up your chances at having some big games.
What about stacking a quarterback and a running back? Is this something where it's viable? There seems like there's a little less like enthusiasm to do this. Like, I'll say that the one I see sometimes on Underdog is Mahomes with Pacheco, where it just sort of it works out ADP wise, but it's not sort of like I get Christian McCaffrey, I really got to push in a Brock Purdy. You don't necessarily see that. Jahmyr Gibbs, Jared Goff, I see it sometimes. Is this something where you think this is plus EV? Do you think this is something where it's specific to the type of running back?
I think it's specific to a receiving back, but also somebody who's going to be a workhorse. So the good example that I can think of off the top of my head right now is like Saquon Barkley and Jalen Hurts, because when you get into the red zone, what's everybody's fear with Jalen Hurts? It's the tush push getting in the end zone, right? So if you have Jalen Hurts and you have Saquon Barkley, you're pretty much secure for the touchdown now. And then they also have the ability to, Barkley's out there with the ability to catch, 50, 60 balls. And be able to get that stack with Jalen Hurts. So I think it's very unique to one, the players, but two, I think it's also unique to the overall power of the offense. Like, I'm not going out here and stacking, Jaden Daniels and Brian Robinson, right? I think that's probably stupid. But I would say Mahomes, Pacheco makes sense, right? But I would be more inclined to do it with Barkley, Jalen Hurts. I'd be more inclined to do it with, Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry, right? Where you're pretty much guaranteed a red zone touchdown.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that. Like that's actually, I think, an interesting viable strategy is the high-end rushing attacks and just completely diving into it, where instead of trying to correlate the pass catcher with Lamar Jackson or Anthony Richardson, you dive into a Derrick Henry or a Jonathan Taylor, where the potential touchdown equity you get between those two players could be massive and immense. It's just an interesting way to do it. I think that's been something that's been less done, and I think it actually could give you a leg up in a larger field tournament when way more people are sort of stacking the pass catchers than trying to double tap in terms of like the runners.
Yes, I 100% agree.
So let's talk about. Let's say that people are listening and they don't play on Underdog and they don't play FFPC, and they're people that are concentrating on their home leagues and trying to get better at winning 12-team leagues, 14-team leagues, 10-team leagues for that matter. Do you find that stacking is a viable strategy in a smaller field, non-tournament setting, or is this something where people can get themselves in big-time trouble?
I think you can get yourselves in big time trouble. You're only trying to beat out 11 people inside of a confined league. You don't need to beat out 600,000 other competitors. So stacking at this point is less important. I think this is where you can do mini stacks, right? You can take the Patrick Mahomes and Marquise Brown stacks. You can, you don't want to go 3 pieces deep on an offense now. I think you limit it to 1 or 2, max 3, where, if I'm in a tournament, I'm probably going 3 or 4 at times. But I would not do that in a confined league. I'm being a lot more conservative, and I'm taking pieces of offenses.
So I'll take a little bit of a contrarian approach on this. I think for a smaller 12-team league, when I take a quarterback, I do like having, like you said, a correlation there. But I'm gonna maybe prioritize that a little bit more than you are, because my feeling is I oftentimes can find 2 ADP wins without reaching. Specifically taking that quarterback and then backing it up with a tight end or a wide receiver. You see it year after year where it's sort of like a rising tide, where this one player hits and he brings people up with him. I also have sort of a double bet when I get to the money weeks, like the playoffs, where I could have a lethal combination. But like you said, I think that the biggest takeaways from Billy's advice are don't reach to do this. Let it sort of come to you, especially when you get down to a 12-team league. In a 12-team league, I can avoid correlation altogether and still have all the edges I need to win with sound drafting and great waiver wire and start sit management. But when it presents itself, I sure do like it. If I draft Dak, if I draft CeeDee Lamb, it makes me more inclined to take a Dak Prescott as my QB1 sort of thing. It's a double bet, Billy, really, for me.
Yeah, I think that's fine, right? But I'm not taking CeeDee Lamb, Tolbert, and Brandon Cooks on this offense, right? I'm taking Lamb and Dak, or I'm taking maybe Lamb, Dak, and Tolbert, right? I'm not going all 3 weapons here plus the quarterback. So I think to a degree, yes, we're stacking, but we're not going crazy.
Yeah, and you could probably pass up on Jalen Tolbert altogether in a 12-teamer, Billy. Leave that guy on the waiver wire. Let's talk about one thing that I think is interesting and a really viable way of playing, especially best ball. and it's a running back from the same team. And this is something where if you ask somebody, this is sort of like that seems like a total square move to double tap running back in that best ball setting. But it's actually, there's a lot of research with this over the years. There's been some very smart people. Our own Josh Larkey did a lot of research on this. I know Mike Leone at ETR, Jack Miller at ETR have dove into this, where it's actually a positive strategy. It's certainly not always a positive strategy if you have to use an obscene amount of draft capital and really reach to take guys at ADP. But stack cuffing, this is a viable strategy. When we talk about these ambiguous backfields, potentially double tapping them, this can be a very viable way of playing, especially in best ball.
Yeah. Stack cuffing is the term. I forget who. I think it was Todd Burrows was the one who I think kind of started this verbiage. Again, it's very particular situations, and like what I've done, the ones that I've used so far this year, is like Elliott and Rico. Right, you can get them at RB40 and RB43 pretty consistently. You can get them even as RB45 and RB48 or RB50 sometimes, and so you're getting now combined RB1 on the Dallas Cowboys, which is going to be we're expecting another, high-powered offense. And if you can get that production to combine, they're an RB1, right? And it's trying to pick and choose right now is madness, but you can get them both pretty cheap. So that makes sense to me. You can also do it right now where you can take Kyron, who's been slipping. Like I got him at the end of the third, early fourth. And you can come back around and take Blake Corum. And Corum's been rising as of late, but again, you're spending, top 12 at the position, and then you're turning around and getting, Corum, who's like RB40 right now in Underdog. So I think it works in certain situations, but I'm not going out and doing it with every team.
Agreed. A couple of backfields that I like doing it with. I really like doing it with that Cincinnati backfield where you can get Zach Moss at RB26 and then Chase Brown's like running back, let's call him running back 38, where I'm in two ranges of the draft where I can basically double tap that spot. And I know that I'm going to get RB2 production every single week out of two guys that I'm taking sort of outside of RB2 land. Zach Moss is close enough. But with that offense being potent, I think that could be a very, very high EV strategy. James Conner and Trey Benson are also priced correctly for you to double tap it. A little more pricey, but that's an offense that I know, Billy, you've circled as a big ascending one. I like as well, with Conner at RB27 and Benson at RB30. And then that Tennessee one. The Tennessee one I think is interesting because Tyjae Spears has been a really easy click for me at RB37. I think he's got, those spike weeks and certainly the way I draft where I'm often like punting RB2. But I think that there's an argument for the Pollard Spears double tap. I think they're going to be utilized, and I think there's going to be consistent weekly touches between the two of them, and you can probably eke out some positive production by double tapping those guys. So I think that's one thing to dive into. One last question when we talk about strategy is, what is the max number of players you're comfortable drafting from the same team on like an underdog build?
Again, it's very team specific, but I'd say 3 is a pretty good number. I don't like to go 4. I will with some offenses in some situations, but I'd say 3 is a pretty comfortable number.
I agree with you. I think 3 is the comfortable one. I'd say 4. Like I agree with you on the like team specific. Like if it's Green Bay and maybe you're not having to take a wide receiver for a little while, and I end up being like a Jordan Love Musgrave with 2 wide receivers, or even a Lamar Jackson one where it might be Lamar with either Derrick Henry, Mark Andrews, or Zay Flowers, and then potentially I can double tap Rashad Bateman and Tez Walker, or Keaton Mitchell late, something like that. I've been comfortable doing that, but 4 is like the exception. I think 3 is sort of the norm for me when it comes to like where my comfort level's at. But you see some people going crazy, Billy. You see like some people going with like a 5, really pushing that.
I saw someone was like literally like the entire team. It's like they're not going to have 6 touchdowns. Like they might have 3 or maybe 4 in a game, and now you just really limited yourself. And what happens if they get shut out that week? You're shut out that week, and so there's so many, I think, negative impacts of this as well. An offense that I went for the other day. I mean, maybe a little biased here, Theo, but the Niners, and this kind of brings in everything we just talked about, though. It brings in the Kittle piece. So I went with CMC as in the one hole. I did not get Ayuk or Debo, but I ended up taking Kittle. Then I took Purdy, right? So now I'm up to 3. And then Juan Jennings is free. You can get him around 18, like it doesn't matter where you're at any given time, right? Which now just opens up to, a lottery ticket as the 4th spot. Or what happens if they get rid of Debo? What happens if they get rid of Ayuk, right? So it's that contingent upside as that 4th piece, and or injuries, because we know Debo is pretty and Kittle. We have both these guys are pretty injury prone, and now you just gave yourself some upside at the end of the season with a free ticket.
So Billy and I are going to reveal our top 5 stacks overall, and we haven't even shared this with one another. We're like, I don't know who Billy's top 5 is, but this will be a fun one. But before we do that, Billy, let's talk about a couple of under the radar secondary stacks. I know you listed a couple, and I listed a couple of quarterbacks. I think that when we're talking about a secondary stack, we're going to specifically look at sort of quarterback 20 and below. Those high-end QB2s for a lot of drafters, that could be your QB1 to begin with. I think that a lot of times you see people, especially in best ball, they might just double tap those high-end QB2s. But let's say you took a premium quarterback. Let's say you waited a little while. I'm looking at Deshaun Watson as a guy that I can stack, and I think I can add correlation with. I think that offense could be more aggressive. And as my QB2, I think I could have a couple of more spike weeks than maybe anticipated. David Njoku obviously makes sense. Amari Cooper makes some sense to me as well. It just seems like with Ken Dorsey as the offensive coordinator, that's an offense that's going to at least attempt a lot of RPOs, a lot of downfield shots. How about you? What's a quarterback that kind of stands out to you as a secondary target?
I got a little down and dirty on these ones, Theo.
I just looked at it. Really, you're getting some skanky QB2s.
I thought we were getting dirty here. I mean,
yeah, we're getting to the weeds.
You start listening to Deshaun Watson, Amari Cooper, like get the hell out of there with that shit. That's like mainstream stacks here. Thought we were supposed to get creative here. All right, I did Daniel Jones as quarterback 30 and Slayton with wide receiver 90 together. So Daniel Jones has finished as quarterback 17 or better in 3 of the past 4 years. And we know he has the rushing ability. So I'm not saying that Daniel Jones is somebody I want to like hang my hat on, but quarterback 30 late in the draft with the rushing upside and new weapon with Malik Neighbors. I mean, there's a potential there where, they're going to be a little bit better than people are thinking. And then Slayton, Slayton's been kind of sneaky the last couple of years. He's finished as wide receiver 55 and wide receiver 53. He's had 888 yards, 960 yards, and 6 touchdowns between the 2 years combined. 777, 24 yards. Looking at air yards here. But so you're about 700 yards or more in 2 years combined as wide receiver 90. That's a pretty good deal in my opinion. And I don't think that his role disappears. They just gave him more incentives today, actually. So I was actually bummed to see that because now he's going to probably climb a little bit in ADP, not much, but maybe around. But he's been pretty free in drafts.
Well, Billy, there's a reason he's kind of free in drafts. Slayton's, I had to write about him on the waiver wire for years. And it's like every time you write about the guy, he gets 50 yards. And it's like, oh, he got 50 yards. But it's like, Slayton's a tough one. I'll say Wandell's a little sneaky for me because I think Wandell could be a really kind of fun PPR weapon. Despite Neighbors being there, I think Wandell going into year 3, Neighbors is going to get a lot of focal point of the offense. There's going to be weeks where Wandell is going to get 7 catches, 8 catches, just based on the matchups. That's a fun one.
Hobbits just don't do well in the NFL, though. Hobbits just get crushed. And so Wandell is going to be fun for a couple of weeks, and then he's going to be like 4 weeks on the IR. And then he's going to be back for a couple of weeks. And I'm telling you, man, Slayton has just been there the last couple of years, and it's gross, it's dirty, and you can't ever predict it. But in best ball, that's what it's for.
The utter disrespect that Billy Muzio has for the 5'7" and under community. If you're 5'7" and under in the chat, let Billy know about it. But there's one question in the chat. Shout out to Applied Literature, who listens to a lot of our shows, is asking, whoops, that's the wrong one. Is Billy a fan of the Ricky Pearsall pick? Billy was not with us when we were in Detroit for the NFL draft. He was recovering from a knee injury. So Billy was on the IR, couldn't make the plane ride. Billy, let's get your reaction to Pearsall, who I can make a positive spin on this one. Super athletic, gives them a little bit of contingency for the 2 wide receivers. And if Debo's on his way out, you could conceivably see Pearsall stepping right into that role. Super athletic.
Yeah, I didn't hate it. Let's just say it that way. I felt like they might have been able to move up in round 2 and get him. And then I kind of wish they would have used the pick on the secondary is what I was hoping. It's kind of been our weakness for the last few years. So I don't hate the pick. I agree with you. He's very athletic. If there was a player that I was going to, peg as this year's Deebo Samuel, that's who it would have been. And so I think it was kind of insurance for the Niners to say, if Deebo misses time, we're not going to skip a beat here. We can plug and play. Or if we have to move on from Deebo, or if we have to move on from Ayuk, we can plug him in here because he's a physical receiver. So I don't hate it. Would have liked to see a secondary pick there and then move up to get him. But I'm at this point, I'm splitting hairs.
Your 49ers have hit very well drafting wide receivers in that range of the late first, early second round. Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, similar range. Both guys big time hits. So we'll see if they go 3 for 3. Give us one more under the radar. I'll give you one more under the radar stack. The Vegas quarterbacks. The Vegas quarterbacks are just so cheap. You could get burned here if you miss. But Minshew, you can stack them with Bowers. Certainly Devontae Adams, if you go that direction, correlating him makes sense. And the way that it's set up with the Raiders is Jacoby Myers gets literally no love. The guy's going to beat his ADP. He's just a little bit boring. It's a little lack of upside. But Jacoby Myers was very effective last year, and you can kind of build that. Billy, give us one more under the radar before we move on.
I'm going to get down and dirty again here, Theo, and I'm going to go with Bo Nix and Marvin Mims. Marvin Mims, I think, is going to step into a bigger role than people think. I saw people in the chat talking about it earlier, and they probably saw our show sheet, Theo. But Marvin Mims could have himself a pretty big year. I think he's a deep threat. He's lightning fast, 4.38. Bo Nix, I think, is going to win this job pretty early. I would say if he's not starting by week 4, I'd be surprised, but I think there's a real chance that he's the starter out of the get-go pretty easily. And so I think that Bo Nix is better than people are giving him credit for. Maybe, again, bias, a little bit of Oregon blood in me, but I think that when you look at kind of the system in which quarterbacks are drafted, and with this, Peyton offense, they're looking for a starter 4 years in college, though, and Nick's kind of hits on all of the I forget. I'm blanking on the name right now. That's why I'm trying to stall. Who was the mentor for Sean Payton? I'm blanking on his name. The coach that was really good with quarterbacks. He had a system for draft.
Bill Walsh? No.
Yes. No, I think it was Walsh. Yeah. Was it? I'm blanking. Okay.
Peyton, you get the yeah. Anyway,
they have a system.
I agree with you.
They have a system for drafting quarterbacks, and they've been very successful at drafting quarterbacks. And Nix hits on all those points, and so I think Nix is going to surprise people. Bill Parcells, there you go. Thank you, Florisaurus.
So good, thank you, Florisaurus. So Nix, I agreed. I think that Nix is also fun because that Week 17 game is Cincinnati versus Denver. I've drafted a ton of Broncos this year. I find myself gravitating towards the Julian McLaughlin's, Audric Estime's like late. But yeah, I agree with you on the Bo Nix is interesting because the guy's going to get a ton of pass volume. He's a little bit of a screen merchant, but you have seen Sean Payton operate this sort of offense with the short passing game, the screens. I think it's fine. And also Sean Payton has attached his job to this guy with taking him at 12 overall. So that's a fun one. Let's talk about a couple of these players that missed our top 5. So we're going towards the premium stacks. I'll say for me, Anthony Richardson, I think could finish as QB1 overall this year. And I like the Anthony Richardson, Michael Pittman stack, but it missed my top 5 for sure. Richardson's a guy where I don't mind taking a little bit of naked Richardson, or maybe wait a little bit and take like an Adonai Mitchell or like an 18th round Jelani Woods. Billy, how about you? Who's somebody that missed your top 5?
I keep going back to the high-powered offenses. I like Lamar and pretty much any of the weapons that you can get there. So you can get Mark Andrews pretty cheap. You can do the running back combo we talked about with Henry there as well. You can go for Zay. So there's a lot of options that you have. You take Lamar there. I think that's one of my top 5.
Yeah, and one that didn't make my top 5 as well was the Tua stacks. I like Tua a lot, but it certainly didn't make my top 5.
Next one for me is Anthony Richardson with Pittman. Again, this combo surprised me last year. Actually, I was not in on Richardson, and I thought he was going to be inaccurate, which he was. But they were passing more than I had projected, and so I think that you bring that back now, and this kind of rushing ability is going to spread the field. It's going to open up a lot of stuff. So I really like that stack as well.
Wait, Billy, is this just missed your top 5, or is this in your top 5?
I thought this was my top 5.
Oh, so I was listening to my just missed it. So Billy's listed his top 2. I listened to that didn't make it. So I agree with you. I love the Richardson one. We were lost in translation on that. I wanted a couple that just missed, but you're good. So break it down again. Your 5 and your 4 are who?
So I like the Lamar, and pretty much pick your poison there. You can either go Zay or Henry, or you can go with Andrews. It gives you options. And then I like that's funny. I was listening. Oh man, I'm actually laughing now. We got and then we have Pittman and Richardson. Those are the first two I did.
Yeah, so that one just missed my top 5, just because I feel like I can go naked with Richardson more. I don't really need to correlate him as much. So for me, my number 5 stack, my must-draft stack, is Josh Allen with Dalton Kincaid. I think this is a perfect. It's a perfect combination because this is the cheapest. This is where Josh Allen's considerably cheaper on FFPC and on Underdog than he was last year. I can get Josh Allen right now in a 350 FFPC Fantasy Pros Championship at 36 overall. And Dalton Kincaid has steamed up, but Dalton Kincaid is much cheaper than his previous wide receiver 1, Stephon Diggs. So it's not like I'm having to go, Allen and Diggs. Now I'm able to get Allen and Kincaid, especially in tight end premium. I love that one. And my number 4, Billy, this is one where I'm factoring ADP, but I love the Jaden Daniels and Terry McLaurin stack. Because if I miss out on these top-notch quarterbacks, I can draft Jaden Daniels with his immense rushing ability. He also is an underrated passer, and I think it's going to be an efficient offense. And his number 1 weapon, Terry McLaurin, is going off the board at wide receiver 33. So I can get Daniels at around QB 12 with Terry McLaurin at wide receiver 33. I think McLaurin is going to have a great season. I think he's going to put up top 15 numbers, and Jaden Daniels could put up top 6 numbers. It's sort of a contrarian play if I'm looking for elite rushing production for my quarterback spot and I miss on the Anthony Richardson, Lamar Jackson tier. I can wait and get Jaden Daniels and then correlate him with Terry McLaurin. And if I miss on McLaurin, you talked about Jahan Dotson last week. You can go with a Dotson, a Ben Sinnott in like a deeper underdog format. But specifically to FFPC, Jaden Daniels, Terry McLaurin, I think is a really good one. Give us your number 3 must-draft stack, Billy.
Number 3 is going to be Marvin Harrison and Kyler Murray.
That's my number 3 as well. Talk about it.
I hadn't even looked at the show sheet here.
We're completely on the same page. And I'll say, you share your response, but I'll say quarterback 9 overall for Murray. The price is beautiful.
Yeah,
and Marvin Harrison Marvin Harrison in the second round. That's a great price too, because we talk about it, Billy, like legitimately has QB wide receiver 1 overall in his outcome. Now probably won't hit that, but I'm getting him I can get second round and QB 9, and I'm going to get first round production out of Marvin Harrison Jr. and top 5 production out of Kyler Murray. It's a beautiful correlation.
And the target competition for Harrison, there's just nothing there. I mean, the receivers are, leave a lot to be desired. 217 targets up for grabs. There's a lot to like about that stack.
So I'll say this as well, Billy. One other thing for our FFPC listeners is Trey McBride has steamed up so high that it's going to be a little bit more of a split in terms of Marvin Harrison Jr., Murray, and McBride Murray. And also the way that those guys are going in drafts, it's difficult to pull off the Marvin Harrison Jr. and Trey McBride combo in some leagues. So I don't think there's going to be like those as many mega Cardinal stacks going. So I think that you're looking at a Harrison Jr. stacks are going to be a little less rostered because there's going to be the McBride Murray stacks. So you're already getting a little bit of an edge there if we want to go really deep in the weeds. So I love that we're both on the same as number 3. I'll be interested to see if we're the same as 2 and 1. Take it away, Billy. Who's your number 2 must-draft stack?
This one's going to be a little contrary. So I just saw yours. It's not high end like yours. Mine's a little bit, I guess this could have been outside the top 5, but I like doing it because the price. And so it's going to be Josh Palmer, who you can get as wide receiver 58. And then you can get Herbert right now as the quarterback 17. I think both these guys are set to outperform ADP. And I think they're going at discounts right now. And I love the price with it. So it's all price relative is why they're inside my number. That's why they're number 2.
So let me push back on this one for you. What's the chances that Josh Palmer outproduces Ladd McConkey this year? Because there's a massive disparity where they're going.
Yeah, I think that Palmer, in my opinion, is the number. And I'm against the grain here, and I think that I'm abnormal in comparison to most analysts, but I think Palmer is the wide receiver 1.
And I will say that I think Palmer is a very good value where he's going. I will lean into McConkey leading them in production. I just think he's a little more dynamic.
He's more talented.
The big takeaway for me, though, Billy, is Justin Herbert's QB 17. It's a shocking ADP right now. I mean, I think that I understand the fear and trepidation that it becomes super run heavy, but that's got to be that's way too low.
They can't run that much. It's too low. They can't run that much. Look at the running backs they have. They have Gus Edwards and Dobbins. Dobbins gets hurt putting on his shoes. Gus Edwards we know what he is at this point in his career, and so we have Herbert out here who's thrown the ball, almost 700 times a season. And I know he's not going to throw that much, but even if he regresses down to like 575 or even 600, this is a value.
So we were on way opposite extremes here. My number 2 stack is Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase. And it comes down to it. It's expensive, but it's not as expensive as it was last year. And I'll say this, like, Joe Burrow this year is going off the board at QB 8. So very much like the Marvin Harrison Jr., Kyler Murray stack, this stack is cheaper because of the quarterback cost. Joe Burrow at QB 8 I think that's a great price. And I think that with Jamar Chase, that's a guy who I think could finish as wide receiver 1 overall. So Chase cost me an absolute fortune, but Joe Burrow, you also see some underdog and FFPC drafts where Burrow slides a little bit more. So quarterback 8, but sometimes he goes as low as like quarterback 10. That's an offense that I really, really am betting on this year. They get to play a last place schedule this year as well, which is really like you're talking about a team that we would bet on getting back to the playoffs this year. But because of how the season went last year, where Burrow missed time, they get to play an easier schedule as well. So that's a premium stack, Billy. That's a premium correlation. But that's one that I just love drafting.
I like it. Don't hate it.
All right, Billy.
You're
number 1. No drum roll.
No, we've talked about this one a lot, and I'm going to continue to beat the drum because I think it's mispriced, and it's going to be Marquise Brown and Patrick Mahomes. Marquise Brown to me is the clear-cut 1. He's also a deep threat. If you go back to the game log and what he's been able to do, like, look back at that stretch that he had where he was like the wide receiver 1 for like 4 weeks. And I think now he's got a quarterback that can give him the ball. He's going to be the deep threat in an offense that lacks, consistent wide receiver wide receiver consistency. Travis Kelce's not getting any younger, and this is an easy one.
So I love that one. And certainly that's one where I should have probably had that in my top 5, but the value you're getting on Brown and also the fact that you're getting Mahomes as QB4 is a value. But for me, my number 1 most targeted stack and my number 1 stack to draft right now is Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jared Goff. Jared Goff is quarterback 16. So by going with this stack, going with this correlation, I get a wide receiver who can finish as wide receiver 1 overall. And I don't have to take his quarterback until quarterback 16. Last year, Jared Goff was easily a QB1. I think this year, with that offense taking another step forward, Ben Johnson's 3rd year as OC, Jared Goff just got paid. You get Sam Laporta in year 2, Jahmyr Gibbs in year 2, Jameson Williams, his explosive ability, now has some experience behind his belt. And you get Amon-Ra St. Brown, who's about as alpha as it gets, one of the elite target earners in the NFL. and I get that quarterback at quarterback 16, Billy, you talk about the price I have to pay for a guy factoring into this. It's a no-brainer for me. Jared Goff could be this year's Dak Prescott, mid QB2 price, and finishes inside top 5 quarterbacks.
Yeah, you don't got to twist my arm for this one. It's one of my favorites as well. Probably just outside my top 5. And you got to love the Week 17 matchup for the correlation against the Niners. It's going to be a high-powered game.
Yeah, so just to break it down one more time, Billy at number 5 had Lamar with Pick Your Ravens. So I'm going to say I like Zay Flowers. So we're going to revision his history. Billy's on Lamar and Zay. I'm on Josh Allen and Dalton Kincaid. Billy at number 4 had Anthony Richardson and Michael Pittman. Number 4 for me was Jaden Daniels with Terry McLaurin. Love that price. Number 3, Billy and I are on the exact same page. Kyler Murray and Marvin Harrison Jr. Number 2, Billy went with Josh Palmer, his favorite NFL player besides Cortland Sutton, and Justin Herbert. And I went with Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow. And then number 1, Billy Muzio wants you to draft Hollywood Brown with Patrick Mahomes. And I want you to draft Amon-Ra St. Brown, the sun god, with Jared Goff. Billy and I are going to be bringing you a number of these draft strategy shows. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you hit the like button. Make sure you're subscribed to Player Profiler YouTube. Billy, what do you have coming out?
1 second. There's one caveat to the show. You can't drive ADP up, so don't reach on these.
Billy, what do you have coming up?
Coming up, I got pretty much just our podcast, man. I'm doing the cameo for the draft kit for a player for you, and I think outside of that, just a lot of behind the scenes work.
Yeah, and look for another episode of Dynasty Life dropping this week with Jared Smola. This was an awful lot of fun. We will see you back on First Class Fantasy next week, right here on Thursday, every single week. And look for all of our written content also on Player Profiler. I have some really cool articles coming out as well. We'll talk to you soon.